Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus complex solution, and I'm getting back into the regular episodes now, and so this is episode 175 called Master and Commander, reasons for which will become apparent. I'm kind of hoping that you will actually be able to see this because there are some issues going on with Rumble at the moment. There's a number of the videos of mine that are not being able to be accessed, so I am in communication with them, and that, so hopefully that'll be an issue that gets sorted in time for this one at least. We'll see what the issue is and that as we go along, and obviously in that I'll stick it up on the censorship channel as well, and that, and see how long it lasts there. Before I get started into going back into the process of doing the audit for the Ministry of Defence, just a bit of a heads up on that, to stick around till the end, because I've got three things that I want to have a good rant about. I'm sure you'll understand what they're going to be. One of them is to do with the stuff about autism of late. Another one is to do with the so-called free speech in the UK and the issues that have been taking place here, and that particularly overnight. And then another thing as per starting yesterday, and that to do with this digital ID. So just to let you know that I will be addressing those matters when I go forward after completing this audit part of things. So let me just get onto it then. So this week I'm looking at the UK Hydrographic Office, which sits underneath the Ministry of Defence, obviously. Now, I have to deal with the finance side of things first, and obviously and most of this is actually going to be around the formation of the organisation and the finance side of it. But if I just get the benchmark period data out of the way first, and benchmark being 2019 to 2020, they claimed a net contribution of 37 million, average salary of 50k, cost of employment rate at around 69%. Obviously, I'm now taking a full 5-year record, so we can see if there's especially the claims that you get around austerity, to see if that's true or not. I understand that there's the periods prior to that, but I want to cover this 5-year period, and plainly, once again, it's not the case. In terms of them being the net contributor, that contribution as such does seem to be going further and further down, but that is happening at the same time as you're seeing increased staff levels and average salaries going up as well. So it does go in line though with a fairly stable cost of employment. But the interesting part to this really, and that for me, was that, you know, it's a case of where the revenue was actually coming from, which is something I'm going to have to look at a little bit in a short while. But there is one other element that I have found a bit odd when looking through the annual report, which is how the dividend structure seems to work, and how this particular organisation is formulated in the first place. I'll give you a little bit of advance notice here and that for something I'll talk about in a second, but the good example really in that when it comes down to the dividend structure is that during the benchmark year there is the report of the dividend actually exceeding the net position, and so that to me basically indicates something that is of interest at least, and something that indicates a bit of an issue. So in terms of just talking about who this office actually is, I'm kind of assuming that people would understand what hydrographic means in the first place, but just in case you don't, it's about mapping the oceans. So you're talking about like navigation systems, things that are based around that. And the revenue part of this then, depending on which particular source you go to, all from all coming from the same source actually, in that, but in terms of which document you look at, they're then claiming that their revenue for this mapping that they do, to be able to be selling it as like a service, or as like an ownership of intellectual property, because they're the sole source of that particular mapping data and navigation data. Apparently they are then selling that through to either 63 countries, as it said in one of their documents, and then 71 countries, depending on, because apparently within the annual reports it's 63. You look at their website and they're saying 71. They don't seem to be able to make up their own mind on that. You can also see those claims if you visit their YouTube channel, which there's a link in the description to that. I'll talk a little bit more about the revenue side of things and basically the setup from a financial perspective again a little bit later on. But first and foremost, this office was only formed at least in this format, since 2001. But the history of this kind of navigation system and kind of goes into what was previously known as the Admiralty. Again, issues around that later on. But it actually goes back to the 20th of January 1914. Now, you might obviously think, well, how is that something that is being able to be stipulated on such a precise date? And it is because there was this specific agreement that was made on that specific date, and that's why I've included the graphic of it that you can see on the screen here. Now, naturally, people can turn around and say, well, mapping and navigation and things like that goes back a lot further than 1914, and that is absolutely true. But this is to do with the formalisation of the Admiralty, which started to be able to produce that kind of information. So when you had the very first Admiralty, that was again that goes all the way back to 1795. So again, the mapping has actually been done, but in terms of it being a formal agreement from the Admiralty, that's where 1914 comes in. People can then also say, well, yeah, okay, so that's the English side of things, and doing that since 1795, and then making it a formal arrangement from 1914. But mapping goes back even further than that. The obvious example then that comes to mind is that the Piri-Reis map, and that was created in 1513. But the point here in that is in terms of being able to have something that was done as a cooperation between states. So it's not just based around what the UK Admiralty was doing, because naturally, that if you want to be able to map out the seas and understand the I suppose like the what's it called, like the tides and things like that, and the weather that surrounds it, and all this type of stuff, putting it all together, that's the kind of information that we're talking about here, and why that does demand wider cooperation. So that's what this 1914 document was supposed to be all about. And so the specific name for it was the Convention for the Safety of Life at the Sea, or SOLAS. And the very specific reason why that was actually done in a formal agreement was basically because of what happened to the Titanic. If certain nations were to cooperate amongst each other and that, they might understand where the icebergs were and all that sort of stuff. So in terms of something that's supposed to be of use, not only to the UK but to other nations as well, it is something that you kind of think, well, okay, that makes sense. I can see the purpose of this. And so there is a link in the description for the archive document. And I suppose the issue that I've got with this really, first off, just again, it's more to do with process and who owns what and all these kinds of scenarios, because there is a bit of crossover here again, because obviously the United Nations loves to get involved in everything, and they always seem to think that they're the ones that run the globe. And so you've got their organisation, which is called the International Maritime Organisation, And they also have adopted this SOLAS agreement. And so there does need to be some clarification, really, in this regard, because I mean, I've put the link in the description as well to this IMO's claim of operating this particular type of system, because that could have impact to how this revenue system is actually working. Would there be potential, claims from elsewhere and all sorts of situations? Obviously, the revenue is coming in, but it needs to be stipulated quite clearly. And I don't think that's taking place at the moment. Now, despite this being based under the MOD, which, you'd kind of assume that everybody would understand why this would be held under that office, it does go toward a bit of comprehension on a wider scale, really, because if you are looking at something along these lines that does require that level of international cooperation, you do then have to have conversations with people that are trying to be really isolationist, because that would make no sense in terms of these kinds of scenarios. You're going to have cooperation with other nations. So when I'm going through this process and I'm looking at the cause and effect and what kind of relationships we have to have in terms of macroeconomics, for example, which this would most certainly fit into, it is something that we do have to keep in mind, that there are certain areas where you just can't turn around and say, yep, this is going to be under the Ministry of Defence, therefore it is isolated, it is purely for the UK. It's just not the way that would work at all. Not logically, and in terms of being able to have a safe navigation system around the world, you're just not going to be able to do something like that. So I would point that this is one of these areas where I know people have an issue with the fact that the term globalization has been severely bastardized by the worst kind of individuals, but there is a certain area of global cooperation that we do need to understand as being required. There's wisdom behind certain types of terminology, which I tend to be a bit of a stickler for terminology, and you don't have to let it be kidnapped by the very people that's trying to do the exact opposite of what they claim. So the point is, this is what this organisation is about. This is how it was formed. And I've presented what the state of play is in terms of the numbers. And so how this particular office actually operates, and there's a couple of names that you're going to need to understand insofar as this hydrographic office is concerned, because you've got a couple of different organisations involved here. Well, more than that, but in terms of just the straightforward cooperation. And so the first is the Admiralty, which does kind of make sense of a fashion. More on that in a second. But what you can see in that is the four listed services at the top, which do fall in line with what you would expect in terms of providing charts, nautical publications, this type of scenario, and obviously warning notices and things like that. It's the kind of stuff that you would expect to be relevant to this kind of an office. And that is done, as I said, under the name of the Admiralty. But then you've also got another name, which is the UK Centre for Seabed Mapping. That one is where things need to be clarified again, because that leads to a membership group, and within that membership group you've got a whole list of organisations that apparently go toward the development of the data. Some of that I understand, some of that not so much. That particular area, it's something that would require a little bit of investigation. because there are certain organisations involved in this membership that you're going to have problems around ideological input where it should not belong. I'm not going to labour the point on that one for the time being, but just to give you a bit of an example, you've got things like the Met Office that's involved, that for all in normal circumstances you would say yes, well, because you have to understand the weather implications and all this type of stuff, you would understand that, but the Met Office are completely captured and they've constantly been caught out for providing false data so they can push that climate hard narrative. And then you've also got ones like this Joint Nature Conservation Committee. And if you remember the video that I did of Are We the Baddies, they were one of the organisations that responded to me, but by saying that they didn't understand what the hypothesis was for anthropogenic global warming in the first place. So, well, you can't really have an organisation that is heavily focused on that when you don't even understand what the hypothesis is. So, pure ideological interference is what you're going to be getting from these people. Will that be having an impact into things like safety at sea? Well, obviously, yes, it would. Simple as that. So we've got a distinct possibility here in that you might have implications where false data is being fed in, and that needs to be something to be checked. That's something that needs to be checked. As far as the Admiralty side of things, whilst I would have looked at that and thought, well, okay, the Admiralty, I understand that because of the connection with the Navy and so forth, it should be fairly straightforward. But the problem is that when you go into some of the documentation around them, you find out that this Admiralty is now being represented by something called Admiralty Holdings Limited, which apparently for a short period of 3 months was previously called Velocity 273 Limited. Odd. You can, again, link in the description for the Companies House register for this, where this Admiralty Holdings has no employees whatsoever and only publishes micro accounts. Unusual in terms of setup, and also not very old either. So what's the deal with the Admiralty there? These are all things that go towards giving consideration to forensic audit. Now, the next part of interest to me really in that is the classification that this office has, this hydrographic office, because from the information that they put up on their Wikipedia site suggests that they've been classified as a trading fund. Now, you can take a moment if you want and that to just have a bit of a look at what this Wikipedia, this particular part of the entry stipulates, but I was quite interested to find out what is this trading fund and how has this classification come about, because it's not really one that I've come across before, and despite already having covered some of the offices that apparently also fit within this classification, because this is not standard at all. There are no private corporations that are listed as a trading fund in this manner. So I wanted to have a little bit of a look and see what that was all about as well, just so that I'm understanding how the government is structured, because this all does fall within that kind of remit. And so what I determined here in that is that this is the particular law from 1973 that granted this situation of trading funds. And beneath that, again, a Wikipedia entry. I know people don't like it and that, but normally when you have government organisations like this is generally speaking going to be something, whatever it is that they want put out there, that's what will appear. It's not really going to be something that's going to be subject to other people doing corrections. So I think we can consider that one, try to consider that one at least, and that relatively reliable. So you can see at the bottom of the organisations listed that the Hydrographic Office is actually stipulated. Now, if this is supposed to be something that is based on a single source of specialised information, where you understand that it's not really, it's unavailable, generally speaking, from any other source. If that's part of the classification and the reason why this trading fund scenario was set up, I'm not entirely sure why the Registers of Scotland is being placed in this grouping. That's another one that's sort of like something's not quite right here. But essentially, the main thought that I've got around this is to question why this classification would even be needed. And I'm not necessarily saying that I've identified something which is criminal or anything along those lines as yet. But oh, come on, you bugger. It is one of these situations, again, where it's raising red flags in terms of looking at things from a forensic point of view. So I don't really see the point of these trading funds, and I do think it is something that I would have to put in to the RASIC stage, the following stage after this, to say, right, we really need to narrow down and focus on auditing this proper. It does then lead to another aspect that when I said that I was going to come back to the dividends, in this particular Hydrographic Office situation, and you can get this information from their framework document, once again links in the description, we can see that there's an agreement here to pay the MOD 12.5 million per annum for the duration of this office existing. So, okay, leave questions about that for another day. But then the relevant part from the financial statement of the benchmark period of 2019 to 2020, as much as the previous year, you can see that they haven't actually met that 12.5 million mark. We can then see that in the benchmark year, they've paid nearly 42 million, which is considerably more than if they were trying to make up from the year before. And it also has this problem of them only having made 37 million in that calendar year. In that financial year, rather, not calendar year. I don't think that's how dividends are supposed to work. Again, you know, I mean, on the face of things, a reasonable operation might be demonstrating activity that requires forensic audit. And if you're in that reasonable situation of any other kind of operation anywhere else, anything in the private sector, and you've come across something like that, you would turn around and say, well, there might be a bit of a problem here. And if we are going to be doing an audit based off of a dividend that exceeds the net position, one of the areas that we're going to then have to pay close attention to is the operational costs. So operational costs that are external to employment costs. Because there are certain areas within this that in a normal private company situation, you have to report any spend over 25,000, and you have to do that in great detail. because you have to have all the permissions for those payments and so forth. In this particular instance, they're claiming that you don't have to do anything for payments up to 6 million. I think we might have problems with this organisation. So like I say, in terms of what it is on the face of it supposed to be doing, we can look to that and say, okay, there looks to be some justification for this. In terms of how it's actually formulated and what's taking place with the money, that's where we've got a problem again. So I'll give them one minor point of approval in terms of how this has actually been put together, particularly around that framework document, where, and you can also see at the very bottom of that income statement, shall we say. I don't really like them calling it that, but oh well. But what we do have within the framework document is an actual stipulation around the ability to maintain retained earnings. Anybody that's been with me for any time at all will understand that one of my big bugbears with most of the organisations and most of the offices underneath government don't seem to understand what retained earnings are. And it's quite a rarity that you can come across something that actually does. Now, obviously in that benchmark period, you're not really going to be able to do too much with retained earnings, are you? If you've spanked more than your net position on a dividend, which is far in excess of the amount that you've agreed to. So that's, like I said, that part of it is an issue, but just the mere mention and recognition of things like retained earnings should be standard for any organisation. So I'll give them that little bit of credit. The rest of it, no, we've got a problem here in terms of how and why the organisation is formulated, what the hell this Admiralty Holdings is supposed to be all about, including why was it called Velocity, was it 723 or whatever, it doesn't matter. Why was it called that for that 3-month period? And how exactly is this money being spent? I think there is issues around this that warrant enough for me to turn around and say a note needs to be put by the side of this and say we've got an issue with this office. You might be able to maintain the actual operation of it, but where and how it's operated, that I think is something that's going to require change. So in terms of the financials, of coming back to just remind everybody of what stage I'm at, for just showing the benchmark period at the moment for the Ministry of Defence. Obviously only done 3 offices so far now. Each one of them apparently are net contributors, so going in the wrong direction to what the spend is supposed to be. But like I say, early days. Policy side of things, obviously I've just mentioned I'd stick them in the review and reform category because there's too many red flags for that to be ignored and just left the way it is. I suppose in some ways and that it's kind of I don't know if the word is poignant, but it's kind of convenient, should we say, that I'm coming across this situation where we've got red flags that generally, when I'm saying red flags, I'm generally talking about the potential of fraud in a government office at a time when they're talking about something that I will speak about shortly, but they only want to apply that to the private sector, not to themselves. Convenient that, isn't it? But I'll go into that in a second. So just to finish off this particular audit part of it, the UK Hydrographic Office would go into the review and reform section, and those investigations would need to take place. So now I've got to go into the ramp part, and there's so much going on, it's generally hard to pick what it is to rant about. But this time I've got some real bugbears. And the first one I'm going to go and talk about now is that announcement that was made by Trump and Kennedy about the what they're going to be doing in terms of autism, what they're going to be looking at, and what they're going to be potentially promoting. And a problem I've had with that is twofold. The first one, obviously, that is in relation to the reaction, which I'll talk about in a second. But the larger part is to do with the very widespread response that is based off of this statement of, say, talking about autism as a spectrum. If people want to actually take that as some kind of legitimate statement, then you'll also forgive me if I say that if somebody's got rhinovirus, so basically the actual sniffles, that's on the same spectrum as cancer. Because saying that autism is a spectrum, it would literally be the equivalent of saying rhinovirus, cancer, same thing. It's all an illness, so it's all on the same spectrum. I really do get sick and tired of this spectrum nonsense because it's lazy. And I include the doctors that turn around and say this sort of thing as well. Lazy, ignorant, and really annoyingly stupid. I get sick of people turning around and saying, oh, I'm a little bit autistic. Well, no, you're not. I mean, quite frankly, what I'm talking about here, and that when I understand autistic, and yes, there is some personal experience in this, and no, it's not me saying I'm a little bit autistic. An actual autistic child, I genuinely, I don't give a toss if somebody wants to turn around and say, right, we need to be changing the names of things, and the kids that I consider to be actually autistic, as in they can't verbalise properly, they don't understand social norms, they can't function correctly. If you want to give them a different name so that there is clear distance between a real genuine case of a kid that has got serious problems and some dipshit like a fucking chef that wants to call himself a little bit autistic because he's been caught saying rude words to somebody, those are two very, very different fucking things. And I get really annoyed at people trying to put all of that together by saying, oh, it's a spectrum. Fuck off. Because when you get that sort of nonsense that comes out, that's when you get the idiots that have had the kind of reaction that has been far too dominant since that Trump announcement. The point that I've been making online is that there was a very good example as to, within the same week, how the so-called the science is just yet again the exact same kind of fraud that obviously nobody has learnt any bloody lessons whatsoever from the coronavirus period. Because we also have the announcements where everybody wants to jump up and down and say, oh, amazing. Because they claim that we've cured Huntington's disease. Everybody turning around and say, oh, this is how science is supposed to be done. This is proper science. This is proper medical science. Is it really? How many people has this so-called discovery cured? How much testing has been done on this? Does anybody read anything about that? Because the answer would be fucking none. Not a single drop. Nothing. It's just them pushing yet more of that bloody mRNA nonsense. And the entire basis of their claim is, oh, well, the data suggests that we might be able to do something. That's it. That's the fullest extent of this so-called science. You've used gene therapy which included no therapy whatsoever, based off of DNA, which has 20 models, not one, 20. So our model of a model has spat out a data sheet that said, oh, look what we've done. That's real science, according to these retards. And then the announcement that was made, where everybody wants to have a spastic fit about paracetamol, which, no, it has not been tested on pregnant women. What they did do is completely miss what was actually stated, and that in terms of a therapy, a treatment that they want to investigate properly, whilst doing further studies around potential effects of, it's actually the vaccines, then paracetamol, making matters worse. So it's not just about paracetamol at all. That needs to be investigated further. In the meantime, they want to try this, if I can pronounce this correctly, leucovorin. They want to try that. And the response that they've been getting is, this is pseudoscience, it's nonsense, Trump said it, so therefore everybody needs to ignore it. Despite the fact that the basis of this consideration towards a new treatment is not something that they just literally plucked out their arse 4 years ago and that has been causing problems across the entire world for all manner of people. This is something that goes back to 1974 in terms of the progress of people understanding this particular problem of autism. What are the functions that we need to look at in terms of being able to find a treatment? It goes back to 1974. So no, it's not new. And then you have the person, this Dr. Fry, who's actually been doing tests since 2012 and having some positive results. Is it at the stage where he's going to say, yes, this absolutely will cure everybody? No. It is at a stage where it's having positive effects on enough people with actual autism, not a fucking speech impediment. Actual kids with autism, it is helping them to be able to speak for the first time. So from 2012, when he did his first testing, there's 13 years of studies, along with 46 other studies. But no, we won't bother looking at that, will we? We'll just have a bunch of retards that are coming out and going, autism's on a spectrum, from people that haven't got a clue what they're talking about. And I also found it really, really bloody annoying. I hope it's coming across how annoyed I am with this. I actually saw a podcast where some doctor came out to be the expert to talk about this. An expert that I had literally contacted a month earlier to ask about precisely this situation that Dr. Fry had investigated. And she hadn't got a clue. No idea. But now suddenly she's out there on the podcasts. Oh, I'm the expert on this. No, you're not, dear. No, you're not. You fake bitch. Now, am I going to turn around and say, I know all about this because I've been looking into this for fucking years? No. I didn't even find this stuff about Dr. Fry. That was found by a mother with an actually autistic son, whose life has ended up having to be pretty fucking hellish on occasions. And so she desperately tries to find solutions so that her lad can have some level of normality. Because at some point in his life, mummy won't be around. And you have to try to do your best to make sure that that kid will be able to grow up and be able to look after himself, because he won't be able to be put into the hands of scumbags that think that autism is a spectrum. Because of knowing about that, I've seen firsthand what the doctors are like. Vast majority of doctors just took them a antidepressant, drug them into the point of being a zombie. That's the kind of shit that you generally get from doctors. Obviously, you've got some of the good ones, like this Dr. Fry. Obviously, you've got some of the good ones that have actually been able to get through to the likes of Kennedy and Trump and say, you need to be looking at this if we want to solve this problem. But there ain't many of them. And that's why you get this barrage of retards, fake doctors, that all they would ever do is try to drug your kid into oblivion. Turn them into a dribbling fucking idiot. That's what they would do. And for all those people out there that are also turning around with their, oh, leave the autistic kids alone. They're wonderful the way they are. Fuck right off. You haven't got a clue. Not one clue. You've never had to try to bloody manhandle a kid that's gone into complete panic state because they can't cope with a particular situation. Something that they wanted to do, they've been unable to do, and they just go completely fucking apeshit. You've never had to manhandle one of them, have you? I bet. Because I've seen a lot of you out in public, and the way that you do look at these autistic kids, and then the way that you look at the parents that is doing their bloody best. I've seen your faces. Don't give me the you care shit, because I know that you don't. I hope that this just goes forward and just ramrod over every single fuckwit that is trying to put a block on something that might actually help an awful lot of and growing number of kids that have got the severest problems with autism. And yes, they are lovely kids. They absolutely are. But they need fucking help. They don't need help from retards taking paracetamol just because. Every single one of you out there that is doing that sort of stuff, I hope you fucking die. That's how much I care about that. And that's how much I care about the people that are doing that sort of shit. Fucking sick of them. Absolutely fuming about that one. Then we get situations that took place last night. There's the account here and that this guy that goes under the name of Northern Variant. This is a guy called Pete North. Now, I've only really had any sort of contact with Pete over the last couple of months, maybe. And no, it's not a case of me now being best buddies with him or anything like that. It was just literally we've had a few backwards and forwards together, discussing policies and things like that. A couple of months ago, he then put up this particular post online. Pete, obviously, using the name, I mean, his surname is apparently North as well, which is all quite apt, because he does live in the north of England and he lives in North Yorkshire. 10 o'clock last night, he gets a knock on the door from the police. Thought crime. An illegal meme, apparently. This is enough for the police to have come round knocking on his door at 10 o'clock last night and taking him down the station and holding him for 3 hours. North Yorkshire Police, the very same area that includes places like Middlesbrough, where the police don't seem to have had any time whatsoever for investigating Pakistani pederast rape gangs. But they'll come knocking on the door to somebody that puts up a little meme because you might offend the pederasts. Because apparently this is so bad, that's why I've put it up on the screen. Fuck the police. Starmer with his public announcements in front of Trump and everybody else. Oh, we've got freedom of speech in this country. Fuck off, you commie cunt. Sending your Stasi around at night, because that's what commies do, isn't it? Thankfully, the backlash is only just starting for this one. Because there's quite a lot of people that know who Pete North is. And there's quite a lot of us that are not happy. So that is something that's coming. And then, of course, you've had commie retard himself with his digital IDs. You're not going to be able to work in the UK unless you've got a digital ID. Because apparently this time the excuse is, it's to stop illegal migrants from working. Is it? Well, considering it's you cunts that are bringing the illegal migrants into the country in the first place, how about we just get rid of you and then there's the problem solved? We know that you're doing all this shit and that for the exact same time that the European Union are now turning around saying any British person that goes into the European Union, oh, we need your fingerprints. Oh, we need a digital ID for you. Go fuck yourselves. I ain't going to Europe again. Not the European Union anyway. They can stick it up their arse. And now this communist cunt, Fabian fucking scumbag. And no, I don't care how much swearing I'm doing in this episode. Fabian piece of shit thinks he wants to put this control system, his CCP control system, on this country. Ain't gonna fucking happen, mate. Main recommendation I've given for I don't know how long. Use one of these. Nice little phone. Simple. Do you need one of your retard phones from Apple? No. And the place would be a damn sight better off if everybody stopped using them in the first place. And if everybody's got rid of them, where's he going to stick his digital ID apart from up his arse? Take away the tools from communist pricks like this that are doing their absolute utmost to turn every single country into a control system exactly like the CCP. Not having it. This will be his poll tax moment. They've been pushing and pushing and pushing that they want us to take to the streets so they can put the jackboot down. You might just get it, mate. Keep up this shit, you might just get it. But understand, some of us know numbers. You haven't got enough useful idiots in your pig force. You haven't even got enough in your army anymore. You can try to control the streets as much as you like. It will not happen. It will not happen. This is their act of desperation again. And they're getting more and more desperate to try to force everything on everyone. No, mate. You will have a fight coming to you. And the only thing I will always say to people is, if you do take to the streets, don't smash up your own neighbourhoods. Don't destroy your own towns and cities. Pick your targets properly. Piece of shit. Is this going to do wonders for me and my company? Of course not. Because nobody likes to work with somebody that is a dissenter, do they? Fuck them all. Could not give a shit. Not interested. If there are genuine people out there that want to work with genuine people, feel free to drop us a line. Am I going to tolerate this constant bombardment of bullshit? No. No, I'm not. Is this also a reason why? I mean, it is Rumble caving a little bit, and that's why I'm having issues with my videos. Who knows? We'll find out. Whatever. I'll deal with it one way or the other. I'll deal with everything one way or the other. I do not cave to these agenda monger bastards, whether it's in the UK, fucking European Union, Russia, wherever, CCP, wherever, I don't care. They are not destroying our countries without a bloody good fight. They want one, they'll fucking get one. And in the words of Forrest Gump, enough about that. I think that was what he said. Whatever, doesn't matter, fuck it. That'll do for this episode. Hope you enjoyed the swearing, and I'll see you next week, where we'll see if I'm pissed off with something else. Alright, take care now. Bye bye.